yesterday, but it was long ago. Jane, it was lovely, she was the queen of my night. There in the darkness with the radio playing low and the secrets that we shared, the mountains that we moved, caught like a wildfire out of control, till there was nothing left to burn and nothing left to prove. And I remember what she said to me, how she swore that it never would end. I remember how she held me oh so tight. Wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. Against the wind, we were running against the wind. We were young and strong, we were running against the wind. And the years rolled slowly past.
We're going to get started in a couple of minutes, so if you could fill in at the empty tables that are not reserved and take your seats. We're going to start in a couple of minutes, and we're going to begin with a video, so we want you to turn your attention to the video board, and if you need help with closed captioning, go ahead and scan the QR code. But if you could make your way to your seats, we would appreciate it so we can start on time. Thank you.
Moving 8 miles a minute for months at a time, breaking all of the rules that would bend. I began to find myself searching for shelter again and again. Against the wind, little something against the wind. I found myself seeking shelter against the wind. Well, those drifters' days are past me now. I've got so much more to think about. Deadlines and commitments. What to leave in, what to leave out. Against the wind, I'm still running against the wind. I'm older now, but still running against the wind. Well, I'm older now and still running against the wind. Against the wind. Against the wind. I'm still running against my brother. If I'm leaning at all, I'm leaning with sadness that everyone's heart isn't filled with the gladness of love for one another. It's a long, long road from which there is no return. While we're on the way to there, why not share? And the Lord doesn't weigh me down at all. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. He's my brother.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. This is your 2-minute warning. If you could take your seats, please. And I just want to remind you, we're going to begin with a video. And if any of you need any help with closed captioning, just scan the QR code. 2-minute warning.
Madman drummers, bombers, and Indians in the summer with a teenage diplomat. In the dumps with the mumps as the adolescent pumps his way into his hat. With a boulder on my shoulder. I can only imagine what it will be like when I walk by your side. I can only imagine what my eyes will see when your face is before me. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak at all? I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
Good evening. My name is Mark Coyle, the athletic director here at the University of Minnesota, and I want to welcome you to the Maturi Pavilion in the celebration of John Anderson, better known as 14. The impact John has had on not only the University of Minnesota, our student athletes, our coaches, and our program, but also on the baseball community across Minnesota and the upper Midwest is unmatched. I'm excited that you'll be able to hear from family and close friends today about the impact John had on them. There's no doubt we lost a legend, and we're so excited to celebrate him with you tonight here in Maturi Pavilion. Thank you, and go Gophers.
Good evening. Well, I've been told, it's been a while since I've been here, but I've been told by many people that anything involving John is probably going to start late. So in the spirit of things, the 6 o'clock performance is going to start at 6:18. My name's Ryan Lefevre, and I played for John from 1990 to 1993, which included the 1992 Big Ten Championship. And thank you. And people say stuff like this all the time, but I can tell you that I'm truly humbled and honored that I'm here tonight. And Jan, my day job does not guarantee that I'm going to get through this gracefully tonight, but I'm going to do my best. So thank you for trusting me with this responsibility. So when I took my official visit in the spring of 1989, Jan and John were dating. And I came from Los Angeles, California. And at the end of my visit, Jan actually drove me back to the airport and later reported to John, there is no chance he's coming here to play for you. More on that later. But not only did I come here, but 4 years later, along with teammate Chris Lawler, who's here tonight, we attended their wedding. And Jan, in some ways, was my first non-college friend and always treated me that way. So I'm honored to be here for you, Jan. The family has asked that we would begin tonight with a prayer. Heavenly Father, our good and just and loving and faithful Father, thank you for John Anderson, a good and just and loving and faithful father, husband, friend, son, brother, and coach. And while we grieve losing him, we are grateful for the impact he has had in our lives. And while our hearts are broken, we know his heart is fully restored and full of joy in your eternal presence. And while we loved him as best as we could, there is no amount of love in this arena that compares to how much you love him. As a coach, in moments of failure on the field, 14 would tell us, I am not disappointed. I am disappointed, but I'm not discouraged. I am disappointed, but not discouraged. And tonight, disappointed is not a word strong enough to describe how we feel during this painful time. So, Father, we lean on your encouragement. Bless this evening, and we ask you to shower us with your grace and mercy and joy as we celebrate his life. Amen. So tonight you're going to hear from people who were coached by John, who coached alongside John for 34 years, who lived alongside John as a close friend and confidant, and played alongside John as a teammate. And tonight we begin with the loves of his life, his wife Jan and his daughter Erin.
First of all, thank you to everybody who's coming to support the Anderson family and our friends. It truly warms our heart to see so many people that have had a connection with John and people whose lives he's had an impact on. Thank you also to the University of Minnesota for organizing this celebration. It means so much to us, it really does. We especially want to thank Coach Ty and Marley and all the others who are helping out tonight. For those who knew John through baseball, you didn't just watch a career. You watched him pour his life into a game, a program, generations of young men who were forever changed by him. For nearly 50 years, Gopher baseball wasn't just a part of John's life, it was his life. He began as a pitcher until he blew out his arm, stayed on as a student manager, became an assistant manager, and ultimately spent 43 years as a head coach. Few people are given the chance or the gift or make the choice to stay with one program and one passion for their entire lifetime the way John did. I moved to Minnesota in May of 1988 with a promotion. I was with Coors Brewing Company. This was literally just after the Gophers battled back from the losing bracket all the way through the Big Ten tournament and took the title. That gave them a berth to the regionals. Coors was sponsoring John's weekly radio show at the hot campus bar that was called Foul Play. I think I've seen a few of you there during that time. And I had only been living in Minnesota for 2 days when my colleagues talked me into going down to John's live talk show. I kind of thought, oh great, I'm gonna go there, there's gonna be this coach that is wearing sweatpants, probably chewing tobacco, is crotchety, and probably a little bit cocky. Then I met John. He was quiet-mannered, soft-spoken. He was also young and good-looking, and in a suit and tie. That night, he offered to show me around town since I was new in town, and he started inviting me to all sorts of events. I wasn't sure if it was because I worked for Coors and I was his sponsor, or if he was actually trying to date me. We've been together since that time and married for 33 of the 38 years. Although for a while, I actually truly wasn't sure if John liked me or my Coors beer expense budget more, but thankfully he loved us both. Being married to a college baseball coach meant living the baseball life. John worked for what felt like 7 days a week, most of the year. His players weren't just players. They became part of our family, and he truly loved every one of them. When I first met him, I remember thinking, oh wow, what a great job. He's got the summers off. I couldn't have been more wrong. Summers were actually spent, they were his busiest season, I think, and they were spent driving across Minnesota and the Midwest and sitting through high school games, Legion games, town team games, searching for that great next Gopher player. I often joined him and sat with him on the hard bleachers during the long, hot evenings. Looking back at those nights, I realized they became some of my favorite memories, watching the sunset, hearing that crack of the bat, and watching John do what he so loved to do, helping young men chase their dreams. John was quiet and humble. He didn't get angry too often, though I'm not sure every baseball umpire would see it that way. There was, however, one thing about John that drove everybody who loved him crazy. He was perpetually late. And I don't mean running 5 minutes behind late. I mean the kind of late where you start questioning if the event is still happening, whether you misunderstood the time, or whether John had simply decided time is more of a suggestion than a rule. It didn't matter what it was. He was the last one on the team bus, the last one to board the plane. He was late to meetings, and if I remember correctly, he was actually a little late to pick me up for our wedding rehearsal. Yet somehow, he always arrived with the same calm, unbothered expression, as if the entire world had simply been moving a little too fast, and he was the only one brave enough to slow it down. After John passed, at the hospital, Coach Ty and Coach Packy shared something with me that made us laugh out loud. They admitted that when they first started coaching with John, they were convinced that his habit of arriving late was intentional. They thought it was a strategy, a power move, as if the coach was making an entrance to remind everyone of exactly who was in charge. But it didn't take him long to realize, nope, it wasn't that at all. It was simply John. He wasn't making a statement. He wasn't trying to command attention. He was just John. Now, there was a very notable exception to that, though. Somehow, every time he had a tea time booked, he could miraculously arrive early. Not on time, but actually early. And what makes that even more endearing is that the same man who could somehow never quite make it on time to a bus or a plane or a meeting, at home he was completely present in the moments that mattered the most. Because when it came to the people he loved, John was never late. He was there. He was an incredibly attentive father to Aaron. He spent countless hours down on the floor playing Pretty Pretty Princess, fully committed to the role, crown and all, as if it were the most important championship game he ever coached. He'd be the grocery store customer for Erin so she could use her toy cash register. He'd patiently hand over imaginary money so it was like a real transaction that mattered deeply to him. And he didn't just sit nearby. He entered her world completely. He gave voices and personalities to Erin's favorite stuffed bunny rabbits, Peter and Bean, turning them into full characters with backstories, opinions, and probably a little bit of attitude. He brought her imagination to life with the same energy and seriousness that he brought to a ball game. As Erin got older, the moments evolved. He spent his time playing catch with her in the ball, trying to give her some batting help, and doing the best to coach her through the game he loved so much. Though he did quickly learn that coaching a young, sensitive girl is quite different than coaching 18 to 22-year-old boys, especially when that young girl was his daughter, and she had absolutely no interest in being corrected, only encouraged. But even then, he adjusted. He softened and he listened. He learned that sometimes the best coaching wasn't about mechanics or results. It was simply about being there, being patient, and making sure that she knew she was loved no matter what. And in that way, the man who was always late to everything else in life somehow was exactly on time when it mattered the most. Some of my favorite memories are simple ones. John driving the pontoon boat on Swan Lake, Aaron and I with him, and whoever else he could pile on with a cocktail in hand, and nowhere else he had to be, which was actually for John very rare. When he retired 2 years ago, he did something I never saw coming. Our roles reversed, and almost every evening he would cook dinner and he'd have it waiting for me, knowing that my job was demanding and my work days could be long. And here's the truth. John just didn't like to cook. I think what John really loved was cleaning the kitchen afterward. I married a man who spent 43 years chasing a perfect game, and in retirement, he found his real calling, a spotless kitchen. That was John. His love language was doing deeds of service for people. He was always doing something for someone else. As his family would say, the siblings were telling me, John always said he needed a job so he could do something for someone. And that was so true. Sometimes I think that John was trying to make up for all the time that baseball had taken him away from home. But the truth is, he never stopped taking care of the people he loved, whether it was his family, his players, his friends, or complete strangers. It's just who John was. Today, I would give anything for one more summer evening on Swan Lake or on those bleachers, watching a Minnesota sunset, hearing the crack of the bat, and holding his hand. Baseball gave John a remarkable career, and it gave us an incredible life. And for that, I will always be grateful. John had just turned 71. He was healthy, genuinely, robustly healthy. His cardiac arrest came without warning or explanation, and it left us searching for answers we may never get. What I know instead is this: John gave everything he had to the game, to the people he coached, to us, and eventually to that kitchen. He didn't hold back. And so today, we don't get an answer as to why, but we get to stand here with hundreds of you because one man's love for baseball and for his family touched that many lives. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. I don't know if that's loud or not. If it is, somebody wave at me. I don't want to scream at you all. Like my mom said, thank you all so very much for being here today to celebrate my dad. Again, I don't think any of us will ever be able to fully express enough our gratitude to Ty and Billy and Marley and so many more of you from the university for pouring your heart into a beautiful evening to honor my dad, so thank you. For 43 years, many of you knew him as 14, Coach Anderson, or John. You knew the leader of the University of Minnesota baseball program. You knew the mentor, the role model, the father figure, the friend, and the coach who impacted the lives of hundreds of young men. You knew the records and the titles and the incredible impact that he had on the University of Minnesota baseball program over those 43 years. But I had the true privilege of knowing him simply as Dad. As his only child, baseball wasn't just something my dad did for work, it was the backdrop of my entire childhood. My childhood was spent at baseball fields, in stadium seats, and running up and down the stands with my friends. The Metrodome quite literally became my best friend, Bridget and I's personal playground. There was no restricted access sign or rope that could hold us from going wherever we wanted. Sorry. My childhood was also spent surrounded by the hundreds of players, their families, and coaches who truly became our family. A family of people that was perfectly curated by my dad because they were the type of people with whom he wanted to surround himself with. If the team was playing at Siebert, that was my mom and I's weekend plan. It was the only life I ever knew, and that community was our home, and it still is. As I got older, my relationship with my dad and Gopher baseball evolved. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing baseball games as a place to run around with my friends and became one of my dad's and the program's biggest fans. I loved talking sports with him, breaking down games, discussing the latest news in college athletics, and texting or even FaceTiming when watching big NCAA baseball games, basketball games, or football games. When it came to Gopher baseball, I probably questioned his strategy a little more than he would have liked. My grandpa, his dad, used to be known as the president of the Second Guessers Club. I think my dad would tell you that over the last 10 years of his career, his daughter proudly inherited that title. To the public, my dad was stoic, professional, composed, and generous. At home, he was all of these things, but he was also wonderfully weird. His niece Amy recently said it so perfectly. If you knew how strange he really was, you felt like you were in a secret club. He had all of you fooled, I promise you that. I'll give you a little glimpse into that club now. Dad, I'm sorry for exposing you, but I don't know what this speech would be if it didn't capture your true colors. My dad was constantly trying to make my mom and me laugh, doing whatever he could to just get a reaction. This was often a weird face for no reason in the middle of a conversation, a strange dance in the kitchen. I just called my mom a couple weeks ago and she said, "Boy, your dad's being really weird right now," and I knew exactly what that meant. The response to the question of where are you being, I'm on the moon, or where is XYZ being, it's on top of my head. This is always the answer. I don't know why. I also quickly learned that part of growing up on the Iron Range meant that everyone had at least one, if not many, nicknames. As a result, for those of you that knew him from that part of life, his were Walt or Plain, depending on who you asked, but don't try to make them make sense. You can't. That tradition followed us into our family life, where growing up I was quickly given nicknames ranging from Eliz to Buckwheat, which is now owned by his great niece Nora, and one's as weird as Banana Fruitcake Head. At 31 years old, I still answer to all of those without hesitation, so feel free to refer to me as one of those. At home, my dad also loved to clean, you heard that. Not because he had to, but because he genuinely enjoyed it. And if you had a stain on your clothes that seemed impossible to remove, my dad was the person that you called. Before his passing, I felt I had only inherited a sliver of the cleaning gene, but now that he's gone, I'm constantly hearing his voice in my head every time I don't wash a glass immediately after its use. So that's what I have to look forward to. As a dad, he was also my compass. Whenever I was anxious, overwhelmed, or unsure of what to do, he had a way of bringing me back to earth. He was a calming force, a voice of reason, and a source of wisdom I trusted more than anyone else. If I was frustrated with yet another adult problem, as we like to refer to them, another nail in my tire or a leak in my house, he'd find a way to make me laugh by saying something like, "It's fun, isn't it, Air?" I only recently learned that many of those vent sessions were often had on speakerphone with his entire coaching staff in tow, Packy, Ty, Rob, Sweeto, Craw, further proving the point that being a part of Gopher baseball wasn't just a job. It meant you were fully integrated into the Anderson family in every way. In all seriousness, no matter the situation, my dad always found a way to make things feel manageable. He helped me see things clearly when I couldn't see them myself. I don't know how I'm supposed to navigate this world without that voice. I admired my dad more than anyone. He was the person I always hoped that I could be like. I was proud of him because of what he accomplished on the field, but even more so because of who he was away from it. Even as a young child, I knew of the many lives he had impacted and how he'd led with integrity above all else. I knew how deeply he was loved. I loved introducing him to my friends. I loved showing him off, not because he was a well-known coach, but because I was so proud of who he was and that he was my dad. Dad, you were my hero long before I understood what that word meant. Thank you for being the father that every daughter dreams of. Thank you for showing me what a life of purpose, leadership, humility, and love look like. Even though our time was cut so painfully short, I'd never trade it for another dad. There will never be another John Anderson, and there will never be a day that I'm not grateful that I got to be and still am your daughter. I love you, Dad.
John Anderson, look at his track record for 40 years. He's been extremely successful.
I grew up in northern Minnesota. Been a Minnesota resident my whole life. I came to the university in the fall of '74. Like every young man that played baseball in the state wanted to play for Dick Siebert. When I was hired, I was 26, and that was unheard of. Hire a head baseball coach at a Division I school of 26 years of age. 49 years later, I'm still at the same institution, doing the same thing. Pretty surreal. I didn't write an 8th grade career paper saying I was going to be a baseball coach. Actually, my mom wanted me to be a priest. But in some ways, I've kind of done some preaching and done some mentoring. So maybe she wasn't too far off. Gotta get out here. Gotta get on the other side. There you go.
I don't think any of us ever could have envisioned him being here for 4.5 decades. And not only has he kept baseball in Minnesota at the university on the map, but his priority was always the student athlete.
The impact that he's had on the amount of people that he's had an impact on is inconceivable to me. 40 years as a coach, the players that he's had come through here, it's in the thousands. Throughout my entire career, I never wrapped my identity up in being a baseball player. It was doing good things in the community. It was being a good teammate. It was being a mentor to younger players. Those are lessons and things that I learned when I was here that I learned from him. I see him as a life coach, a father figure. I think that that's what makes him unique.
Coming out of high school, this is the place to be. You're from Minnesota, you want to play for the home state, and knowing that you were playing for John Anderson, that was a big deal. His ability to connect with people from all different backgrounds with all different challenges going on in their life, felt like I could be me and still be comfortable digging into the areas that I had never really dug into before.
John's integrity and his passion for the maroon and gold and for how he runs his program is what makes me so proud.
To me, that's probably the most profound and impressive thing that my dad has done, aside from his coaching record, which is obviously phenomenal. I really think the impact that he's had and the relationships that he's been able to form with each and every kid that's come through the program, to me, that's a huge part of his legacy.
I've always felt like the best part of my job is the lifelong relationships that have been formed and the ability to stay connected through all these years, and the part that I will cherish the rest of my life.
John's lesson of making those connections to ensure that you have the best chance to be successful is something that I'll take from John.
When you talk about John Anderson and what he means to this program, obviously the all-time winningest Big Ten baseball coach, which is phenomenal. In the top 20 nationally all-time. With all those accolades, he's still just John.
John allows his staff to do their job. And it all starts with him and the leadership about how he wants things done, about his expectations as far as how we treat people and how we do things.
To me, John Anderson epitomes what college baseball is. But I also think about John Anderson, my friend, guy that has been over backwards to help me plenty of times, and a guy that I look up to, a guy that I trust, a guy that I admire. The thought of playing the Gophers and not seeing John in the dugout is pretty emotional for me.
Get to coach against him last year and just, you're at home plate to say, with the lineup card, and you're saying to yourself, man, this is a Big Ten legend. And we all have such great respect, and we all wish we could emulate the kind of character and the integrity that he's shown throughout the years.
To do it with that level of consistency for that long takes a special person. And to do it at one school is even more impressive.
He taught me how to treat people the right way. He taught me how to reach out and go beyond just a normal conversation. He taught us how to win the right way. The opportunity and reputation of Big Ten baseball would not be what it is today if it wasn't for John Anderson.
I don't think that people know the impact or realize the impact that he's had on baseball in this state. He's created a program here where kids grow up and want to be a Minnesota Gopher.
When you look at the generation of players that have come through his tutelage, all will speak to John taking a personal interest not only in their performance but their lives off the field. And I think that's why he is so fondly referred to as 14.
The reason that so many father-son duos come through here is just the way that 14, keeps up with relationships. All the way throughout my life, 14's been personally involved with our family, always checking in. To be able to play with a coach that my dad also had is a huge honor.
It's bittersweet because these kids and these families have truly been our life. They've been with us for so many years. They're still with us. So it will feel like a part of us is missing going forward, but the memories will always be with us.
One of the core memories I have was on Sundays when my dad would be traveling and be out of town, my mom and I would go to church, and I remember coming home and we would plug in the big radio. We'd drag it outside to the front porch and we'd sit on the front steps and we'd listen to my dad's games on AM radio. And that's something that has really stuck with me about being a part of Gopher baseball and this being a part of my life.
Been on this treadmill for a long time. There's a saying in our business, no calendar, no clock, no vacation if you want to get on the treadmill. That's easy to do. I learned a long time ago, you better have some balance in your life if you want to be effective at this.
There's been such a great winning culture here, and hopefully with this last season we can just wrap it up on a high note and give 14 what he deserves.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rob Fornacier, formerly the assistant head coach, Gopher baseball for 33 seasons for John Anderson. In fact, someone called me this week and said, except for his wife, you've probably spent more time with him than anybody else. First of all, I want to thank the Anderson family, specifically Jan and Aaron, for the opportunity to share with you today my relationship with John as a coach. As I said, I worked for him for 33 seasons. I coached 2,000 games with John. And I knew him for 5 years before I came here when I was the head baseball coach at Normandale Community College in Bloomington, where he recruited several of our players. John was a different kind of coach that many imagine a college coach would be. He landed the head baseball job at Minnesota at a very young age, was a walk-on player for the program himself, but he looked at his purpose in the position differently than most. The biggest burden, he often told me, was throughout his career was preserving and growing the program that his mentor, Dick Siebert, had put on the college baseball map. Consequently, as a result of that purpose, the lasting legacy of his tenure as the head baseball coach here was not necessarily measured in wins and losses, championships, or individual awards, but rather the impact he's had on his players' lives and others that worked in or provided support to the program. It was said earlier, but he truly was a life coach. Genuinely cared about his players, their advanced education, their personal development, which is why he ultimately coined that so often repeated phrase, we want to prepare you for the next 50 years of your life. A little bit about the early years with John. I must admit to you that John was ejected from 3 of the first 4 games I ever coached with him. That's truth. And I remember calling my wife Ruth from Texas saying, I don't know what I got myself into, but this guy's a maniac. He was hard on umpires. He was standing up for his team, and who wouldn't in those days when the Texas strike zone was the size of a playing card when we pitched and as wide as the Red River when Texas was on the mound. However, John's demeanor changed when Rick Bay became the athletic director at Minnesota. He told John that we cannot have our baseball coach being ejected from games at the rate it was seemingly happening. Over the years, John changed the relationship with umpires, and when you see the same guys year after year after year in the Big Ten, there became a mutual respect. I even heard in the last couple weeks from several Big Ten umpires that expressed their sincere condolences after hearing of John's passing. Quite a gesture. In those early years, the players tested him. Some of you guys are out there right now. They tested him early, they tested him often in his tenure. He had to establish himself around the league, and one of his colleagues, ironically, you saw the Iowa coach. At the time, the Iowa coach's name was Dwayne Banks. Dwayne Banks was a huge influence on John's career at the beginning, learning to navigate the job at a very tender age. Most of you players will also remember that John was well known around the conference as hitting the best catcher pop-ups in the league. Phenomenal. And also, you saw briefly in the video, but he kept a scorebook for a game score sheet for every game he ever coached. It was a work of art. He learned how to keep score from Dick Siebert. Dick Siebert learned it from Connie Mack. And of course, John taught it to me, and I taught it to several other people, but they truly were works of art. Every year we'd go through the season, I'd make the scorebook up, get it ready for him, and then after the season was over, I would store the scorebook in a closet we had in the office, and I hope that most of those are still around because they really are works of art. When my son Matt left the program in 2005, when he signed, I took John's scorebook and duplicated every game that he played over his 3 years in Minnesota, so Matt and his family would have some record of him being here. There was a big change that happened, though, in the middle 1990s. John began to look at his role as a coach differently when he was introduced to Dr. Rick Aberman at that time period. Becoming a better leader, a better mentor to the players, and helping them improve their experience mentally consumed John. He was never a coach that was enamored with practice or the daily grind of the physical preparation or the X's and O's of baseball. He could talk baseball with anybody, but it became clear that he was fascinated by the concepts of emotional intelligence and how teaching his players to become more self-aware, remaining calm under pressure, having empathy for others, and learning alternative ways to motivate them while developing their social skills could improve our chances of winning big. Late in my career, John told me, Rob, if you'd worry about winning less, we'll win more. We did. If you want to look at what impact he's had on his players, read some of the social media posts that have come out in recent days, and not just from the star players. I remember some of the posts from kids that were relatively obscure, didn't play that often, but yet John insisted that we treat them as well as anyone else. John was ahead of his time nationally and within the U of M athletic department in terms of including the mental game as a huge part of the process of helping players get better. It was not just words or an isolated exercise, but rather something he lived and we practiced on a regular basis. I can speak to that as my exposure to the concepts of emotional intelligence helped me become a better coach, a better husband, and a better father as well. There's no doubt in my mind that the current baseball stadium at the University of Minnesota would not be in existence without the relentless determination of John. Fundraising people on this campus told him it could not be done. He consistently faced many roadblocks from different factions along the way. I had a file in my filing cabinet with notes and photos that we took together from other stadiums that we visited along the way, and it started in 1994. The stadium didn't open until 2013. He rallied the baseball community, developed relationships himself, and through the generosity of many, the stadium was built and paid for. True to his values, he told the designers to focus on the players and player development. Beautiful playing surface, large dugouts, small fall territory, we got that from Dick Siebert, and skill training facilities for the players were included. And I want you to pay attention to what I say in the next two sentences. I shudder to think where the program would be today if that stadium were not constructed. And how long do we have to wait until the facility is named Anderson Stadium, home of Dick Siebert Field? I'd like to talk and mention a couple anecdotes about coaching with John. First of all, recruiting. The very first week that I worked for John, he said to me, all I want you to do is I want you to find guys that want to be at Minnesota. I would like every player that played for John Anderson to stand up right now. Please, stand up. All of these guys wanted to be at Minnesota. They all wanted to be at Minnesota, and I went through the media guide. There's 407 of you that have lettered at the University of Minnesota under John Anderson. 407, and all that was accomplished is because of you. He taught me, don't make promises that you can't keep. We had a great catcher in the late 1980s named Mike Halloran. Later became the coach at Eden Prairie. In the late 1980s, chewing tobacco was a common thing in college baseball. And about that time, Major League Baseball put a ban on chewing tobacco in the minor leagues with the idea that it would ascend to the major leagues, and it has. So John banned chewing tobacco, even though I saw him chew on the golf course many times. Well, Mike Halloran chewed tobacco like there was no tomorrow. And he made a deal with John. John, if I hit a home run, can I go back to chewing tobacco? John said, absolutely. I mean, if you knew Mike Halloran as a player, the home run was a long shot, okay? He was a great catcher, but didn't hit many home runs. So one night we're playing up at St. Cloud. I don't know why we were in St. Cloud. We were playing St. Cloud up there at Putz Field. Sure enough, 6th or 7th inning of the game, Mike Halloran hits a home run. And we were up 15-2 at the time. And he runs around the bases like he had just won the World Series. Jumping up and down, raising his arms, ran right in the dugout, opened his bag up, and put a chew in his mouth. I don't know if Mike is here. I saw him at the church. Mike, are you here? Yeah, that's a true story, isn't it, Mike? That's a true story. You know, John also believed in second chances. I just saw a video on YouTube about Nick Saban talking about giving players second chances that got in trouble. Many of you here, and I won't mention any names, struggled during the college career with making some choices. But John did not throw away people. He did not give up on you. And many of you gave second chances where 99% of college coaches just would have thrown you away. It's been mentioned ad nauseum about John's chronic tardiness. Okay, let me tell you a story. The very first trip that I took with Gopher Baseball in 1986, we're going to Texas, back in the days of paper tickets for the airplane. So we get off the bus at the airport, he hands me the tickets, and he says, I'll see you at the gate. So it comes time to load the plane, and I'm standing there and I'm handing out the tickets to all the players. Folks, I've got 2 tickets left, one for me and one for John. And there is no John anywhere to be found. And the attendant is kicking out the doorstop to close the door. And I said, ma'am, you can't do that because the head coach isn't here yet. She says, if he isn't here in 30 seconds, that door's closing and you guys are leaving. I'm in a suit. We wore suits at that time. I'm sweating through my suit. My first trip. Out of nowhere, Jan, some hallway, he comes out, walks right by me, grabs the ticket, walks right on the plane, and never said a word. And off we go. He also taught me to pay attention and listen to the players. We're playing the University of Arizona down in Tucson. The great Jerry Kindle was the head coach at Arizona and always invited us down there, former Gopher. We're in the Sunday game of a 3-game series, and if we win that game, we win the series. We beat Arizona 2 out of 3. But we had a plane to catch. We had to get to the airport. These kids got to be in school on Monday. Another great Gopher player, Brian Robbie, was a captain that year, was running up and down the dugout, yelling at John, saying, John, we're not leaving here until we win this game. There's no time limit on this game. Of course, we came back and won the game, won the series, flew to the airport, came home from Tucson in our uniforms. So listen to your players. Last anecdote is personal for me because it involves my son Matt, who was our shortstop in the early 2000s. John told me, he says, you got to have unshakable confidence in your players. So we're playing a midweek game against South Dakota State, and we are struggling. It's like a 2-2 game. I'm just fuming because we can't get a big hit. We just can't get a big hit. Gets to the bottom of the 9th, it's still 2-2. And our leadoff hitter that inning was a second baseman from Bloomington named Luke McLean. And Luke did what he did best at Minnesota. He got hit by a pitch. So he gets on first base, and my son Matt was the next hitter. And Matt was a good bunter. He was a good hitter, but a good bunter. And I'm thinking with John, okay, we're going to bunt, right? Because we've got a couple of RBI machines behind him, Mike, me, and Andy Hunter. They'll drive him in, and we'll win the game, and we can all go home, okay? So I'm looking into John. He's going through his gyrations, no bunt. My grandmother can tell me he should bunt, but no bunt. So he's the head coach, no bunt. Matt hit one over the scoreboard for a 2-run homer and won the game. And so I was still mad. I couldn't even enjoy the win. So I get in the coach's locker room afterwards, and I said, John, can I talk to you? Sure. I goes, I'm just trying to learn here. Okay, Matt's a good bunter. We got Mike and Andy behind him. Well, why didn't you bunt there? And he simply looked at me and said, Rob, I knew he was going to win the game for us. That's what he said. So have unshakable confidence in your players. John Anderson can rest easy knowing he had an impact on many. He affected his family, his players, coaching colleagues, support staff, and the entire baseball community. The best way that those of us that had a relationship with John can pay it forward is to take the experiences and lessons learned and apply them in our daily lives. Simply put, that was the whole point. That was the whole point. John, job well done. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I got a couple stories for you. I'm going to repeat a couple from the service today because some of you weren't there. I had a very, very impactful thing happen yesterday. I was downstairs watching the golf tournament, and I was going through my notes, and I was grinding. To say I wasn't a great student's an understatement, okay? So I was grinding because I wanted to make sure that I did this correctly. So I'm sitting there, and I'm focusing, and all of a sudden the light flickers over here. And I didn't really think about it. About 30 seconds to a minute later, light turns on and off again. I kind of look at it like, I wonder what that is. About another 30 seconds go by, and I see it, the light flickers. And I turn and I'm looking at the light. And all of a sudden the light starts like flickering on and off. And I started laughing and I said, 14. I said, John, is that you? The light turned off, on, off, on. This honest to God happened. This is the truth. John knew that I had really, really worried about him. And I had this like ache in my stomach and in my heart. And I asked John, I knew it was him. I started laughing. And I asked John and I said, John, are you okay? Light goes off, on, on. It happened. I was there. And I said, 14, I said, are we doing the right thing? Goes off, on, on. And it stayed on. That was John. John was there to make sure that I was okay. Unbelievable. So I first met John in about 1978. He and George were out recruiting, and I didn't really razzle-dazzle him as far as that whole deal, but that was the first time I met him. I transferred from Gustavus to University in 1980, and I kind of begged him if I could come. And that's when our relationship started. I told some guys earlier, if you had a list of all players before, during, and after the time that I was there and who was going to be friends with 14, I would not be on the list, all right? Definitely wouldn't be on the list. John has been just an unbelievable friend of mine and I can't tell you when it changed from just an acquaintance to a very, very good friend. I mean, we did so many things together, go up to Swan and play golf, and we got the opportunity with John's good friends to go to Canada and go fishing. We did a lot of things together, and 14 and I talked about a lot of things. One of the things that's special about John is that if you're John's friend, all of John's friends are going to be your friends, and all of my friends are going to be John's friends. And the network is unbelievable. The people that are here understand that that's just the way John was. It was a never-ending group of inclusiveness as far as the friendship with 14. Now, some of you guys have played golf with 14. And to say he sprays it around the golf course is an understatement, right? He gets in more places and he'll never, ever not look for a golf ball for an extended period of time. You guys know. And 14 and I, we'd go up to the Braggers tournament every year, and I would always end up being his partner for alternate shot. Some people couldn't handle it. I thought it was awesome. Because 14 would spray us around all over the place, and I would spray us all over the place, and we would always figure out some shot on how to get through it. But it was always an adventure, and John loved to play golf. Now, he was a little on the deliberate side as far as how he played, and we all knew that, but it was always just such a pleasure to be with him. and to enjoy the time that we got to play with 14. Couple stories. One is David and I and Raj and Charlie and Booker, we've been part of the A-team and kind of taking care of hospitality and things like that for years and years. And a lot of times, you know, we'd make a meal for the team after the game, and 14 was pretty cold because some of those early season games were a little cold. And 14 would go inside and he'd warm up, and later on we'd be cleaning up, and 14 would always come over and he'd always thank us for what we did. And he was that way with so many people. We were at US Bank Stadium, and Mike Shea is the kind of the director of the security. And we first went to US Bank Stadium. To say they were uncooperative was an understatement as far as getting things done, as far as taking care of teams. And I needed a guy that could help us, because 14 always relied on me to kind of help out a little bit, okay? So I find this guy, and he's got a different coat on. His name's Mike Shea. And I said, Mike, I need some help. I need some things done here. And Mike went above and beyond his way to help us out. We told John, we said, we found the guy. Mike Shea's the guy. This guy helped us out unbelievable amounts. And that night, it had snowed. And Mike Shea and John were leaving, and they were in separate parts of the parking lot. Most people would have gotten their cars and just left. 14 made a point of walking across the parking lot, introducing himself to Mike Shea, and telling him how much we appreciate everything that he does, and how we really, really need people like that. That's John Anderson, 100% all the time. Now, I got a couple stories. These are honest to God true. So 14, it always seemed like it would work out for 14, all right? So we have a Braggers golf tournament. We're over at the cabin, and I can't remember, the whole family was there, but Todd Bixby and myself and John were at the cabin. And we all had a better way to get to Brainerd, all right? And John's involved some logging road or something, and you guys know there's a secret trail. You had to wash your car 3 times after you went there, but it was kind of a secret, a faster way. So we're talking to each other on the way back, or on the way to Brainerd, and we're all making great time, and I'm on the phone with 14, and I go, 14, how you doing? He goes, I'm doing great. He goes, I'm going 95 miles an hour right now. And then he says, oh boy. He says, I got to call you back. And I said, oh, that's not good. That's not good at all. Well, there was a police officer parked with his radar gun pointed right down the road where 14 was. And I can't even imagine how 14 stood that vehicle on end when he saw the officer. Okay, nobody in the world could get away with this. 14, on the other hand, officer comes over. Can I see your license, and everything? And he says, he recognizes John, all right? Of course he did. We're at 218 land. Of course they recognize John. So the guy says, Coach Anderson, do you think that's the proper way to drive down the court, down the road? Do you think that's a proper example for your student athletes at the University of Minnesota? And John says, you're exactly right. He says, I apologize. He said it was a beautiful Sunday morning, and I kind of lost track of how fast I was going. Now, all of us would have received multiple tickets. Probably I would have been arrested and brought off, 14 got a warning. It's the truth. He got a warning. That's Johnny 1-4 right there. I got to talk about the early toss. We had an off week at Siebert Field, and there was a play the night before, and the California teams love to run inside the foul lines, all right? And 14 would argue and argue with the umpires, but our umpires had a way of not wanting to make sure that, they seemed like they were favorites for Minnesota. Well, Aaron told me about this the other day, and Jan, about how he stayed up the night before, studying the rule verbatim, because 14 was always more prepared than anybody in the room. So we go out to the field the next day, and we're going to play the Sunday game, and 14 goes to me, he goes, "Hey, Billy," he goes, "go get the cart ready." And I kind of go, what are you talking about? He goes, "There's no way I'm going to make the beginning of this game." And I went, "Oh, okay." So I back the cart up to the fence or whatever. 14 gets in an argument before the game, and he's tossed out of the game, grabs his bag, comes down. We get in the cart and go inside, and he showers. He had this all planned. Now it gets better. Jad knows, Aaron knows. We got 14 some food, and we got him some Gatorades and stuff. And 14 went up. If you guys remember the track bleachers at the old Siebert Field, and he's up in the track bleachers, up in the top, and he's watching the game. Well, that's a no-no, right? So I'm over on the first baseline, and the head umpire comes over and waves me over, and he says, "Hey, Billy," he says, "you know John can't be up there watching the game." And I might have got out of my element a little bit, and I said, "I think you should worry about umpiring the game and not worry about 14 up in the grandstand." And he just turned around and walked back, and it was fine. But 14 did a lot of things that were planned, he's going to make sure that he understood what was going to go on beforehand, before he did it. I got to tell you one that happened at the cabin. And we were picking up sticks and some of the pine bushes and things like that and putting them in the fire pit. And we're cleaning up, it's getting to kind of be the end of the day. And I asked 14, I said, "14, you want me to light the fire pit?" He goes, "Yeah, go ahead." So I go over there and I lean over the fire pit and I go to light it, and there's an explosion like you would not believe. This thing goes ba-boom! Goes about 25, 30 feet in the air, and 14's standing on the other side. And if you saw the look on 14's face when this thing went up, and I looked at him like, "14, what was that?" He says, "Oh boy," he says, "I forgot. I was over in the shed, and there was a little bit of gasoline in the bottom of the tank, and I poured it in the fire." And it was like, and I wasn't mad at him or anything. I kind of had some singed hair and whatever. But it was like the running joke all the time was, "14, did you put any gas in the fire, in the fire pit before you did it?" Now I got to tell you, it's been an unbelievable experience to be John's friend for as long as I've been there. I don't know how I ended up being John's really good friend. We just ended up kind of sticking around each other and ended up hanging around. And I tell you, every life decision that I ever made was done with John's help. And the experiences I've had, I've been so blessed to have John as a friend and have the Andersons and the Mitchells. I got a story for you about the Mitchells. They're from a town called Brush, correct? Brush, Colorado, all right? I get credit for being funny sometimes, but sometimes I just don't remember names. And Jan and Aaron and John were going out there, and I said, "Oh, you're going out to Shrub." And I, honest to God, did not know the real name of their family. And I got to tell John's mom that story today, and I admitted, hey, it wasn't really that funny. It was just the fact that I didn't know if it was Brush or Shrub or what it was. So that's the running joke now, is that it's Shrub, Colorado. The last thing I have to say is the Golden Gopher family is stronger than it's ever been. It's amazing that it takes something like this to bring us all together,
to bring the family together of Gopher baseball. And it's all because of John. 100% signed, sealed, and delivered. There's no other reason that there's such an unbelievable support for the Golden Gopher family. I've been the luckiest guy in the world to have John as my really, really good friend for as long as I have. I just say that if you have any person on the planet that is loved as much as 14, that is a great life that he has lived. Thank you, 14. Thank you for being my friend. And we will see you soon. Love you, bud. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Bailey. I'm honored to be able to share a couple thoughts with you this evening. I knew this was going to be a difficult assignment, but it's gotten much harder here in the last few minutes in that I just cannot believe, maybe you felt similarly, the job that Jan and Aaron did. Unbelievable, the strength. I met John in 1974. We were first on campus in the fall, both our first time on campus, and I was a right-handed pitcher, a left-handed pitcher from Rochester, and he was a right-hander from Nashwauk. And I pretty much moved through my adult years with John. We went through all the stages of life together. Started out as knuckleheads in college, and there's a lot of stories I could tell, but none of them are appropriate here for this evening. I do think I will venture into one. It's a bit of John Anderson trivia you can impress your friends with. I believe John is the only head coach at the University of Minnesota who was ever thrown out of his college dorm. We'll have to fact check that, but no, I'm not telling the story of how it happened. But we could do some stupid things. But we went through life together, all the stages, first jobs, trying to get established in our careers. John at Minnesota, I was at Jostens here in the Twin Cities. And then as we raised our families and into retirement, and I'm really happy that in the 2 years John was retired that we were able to spend as much time together. It was special then, and boy, with what's transpired, it's even more special today. When I reflect back on John and thinking really back to the start, what's really incredible is that a young man from a small town in northern Minnesota could have the impact that he's had. I mean, it's easy now to, if you know him as 14, I never knew him as 14. He was either John or Walt. Those were the two nicknames. And if you saw the two of us in college, you wouldn't have guessed we were going to amount to much. But John worked for everything he got. And you stop and think about from being hired as a head coach at 26 with no coaching experience. And he had been mentored by Dick Siebert and George Thomas, but, and you've maybe heard him say, or if you watch some of the videos, I was cheap and I was available. He was not lying. He was both those things. But you think about that journey to being as successful as he was, and all the victories and Hall of Fame coach, think about how hard he had to work, one foot in front of the other, every single day. And I just don't want that to get lost, because I think his life is clearly a model and a lesson for all of us. When I think about what made him so special, a number of things have been mentioned, so I won't go into a great amount of detail. John was authentic. He was one of the most genuine people I know. He was consistent. You knew what you were going to get with John every day. He lived his values to the nth degree every single day. And it's the reason you're all here is that's the byproduct of all that. After a little bit better each day, 50 years later, you wake up and this is the impact that you've had. Incredibly humble. Recently, I think many of you know, he is going to receive be recognized for the Lefty Gomez Award here in January. Of course, I reached out to him, like many of you did, and congratulated him, and I got the typical John response back that there's hundreds of people that helped do this. Because John would never take the credit. You could count on that, and it's what made him John. It's what made him the guy that we love. Very, very caring, very, very passionate, tremendously generous. One personal story, I went down to, I think it was at that same Tucson weekend that Rob referenced, and I had breakfast with him before. And he says to me, talk about generous, he says, how would you feel about going to the Masters with me for 3 days? I said, what? He said, well, I got these tickets and I'd like you to go. I said, well, yeah. He says, well, don't you have to check your calendar? I said, no, I don't need to check my calendar. Whatever's on it, I'm going, we're going. So that was 15 years ago, a good example of the kind of generosity that you could count on with John. He spent his entire career helping other people get better. Think about that. Every day, you've heard him say, I just try to remove obstacles for people. And I think he could do that because I think he understood and what he'd been through in his early years at Minnesota, that we all need help. And he needed help, and he went from there to where he finished. He cared about the things he cared about them deeply, passionate, poured himself into his job, his family, his players, which were the same as his family, it's all one and the same, his friends, which I was lucky to be one, University of Minnesota baseball, intercollegiate athletics, particularly the plight of the non-revenue sports. Can't tell you how many hours I spent talking to him about that. And the one routine that John and I had was when I was at Johnston's and he was getting established at the University of Minnesota, was we'd get together for breakfast or lunch. It was usually at Perkins there. I don't think it's good there anymore, on Highway 100, about 50th or so. And we would get together and talk. And so Rob mentioned in the mid-90s, when John was, I would call it reevaluating himself as a coach. He was searching for the why. Why am I doing this? He'd had a lot of success up to that point. Go back and look at those early years. They won a lot, but he wasn't that satisfied with it. He called it, being on the roller coaster. If it's a good game, I'm a good coach. If the players did well, they're good players. If not, he wasn't always this guy that we see here at the end. And as Rob mentioned, he got hooked up with Dr. Rick Aberman, and I was going through some similar things at Johnston's, and so we'd get together and we'd talk about leadership and talk about, he wanted to be a servant leader and how to get there. And I'm here to tell you, there's a lot of people that talk about doing that, There are very, very, very few people that do it. And John did it. And you all are the beneficiaries of him deciding he was going to change his approach. He was going to build trust. He was going to focus on the young men first and the baseball second. And, hats off to him for doing that. The other topic of our conversation was the quest for the new stadium. Rob mentioned it. It was a full decade of breakfast topics. And it's amazing the obstacles that he faced. I mean, I'll just give you a couple. We'd have breakfast and, well, where's the stadium going to be? Well, I think it's going to be out where those intramural fields are, out beyond the left field fence. Oh, okay. Well, let's start working on that, and then we get together 6 weeks later. Well, that's off now. The university needs to do a master plan. Because about that same time, we were trying to build a new football stadium. And of course, that had to come first. And then for a while, the baseball stadium was going to be over by the football stadium. That never happened. Long story short, it ended up right where it was before. But the incredible persistence and resilience, I don't think there are more than a handful of people in this room, and we got some really driven people in this room, that could have persevered the way John persevered. He was on a mission. He had a vision, and he wasn't going to be stopped. And it wasn't about him. It was about the program and the players. And he saw what we needed in terms of facilities and what the future was going to hold. And he knew from being on these NCAA committees that we were never going to host a region unless we had a facility that was worthy of hosting. And so that's what drove him. And the fundraising and fighting with the university and getting the Twins to support all those things. We were there side by side as he went through that. And in 2018, I believe, late May, early June, the vision all came together. That we hosted that regional, one of the best teams, one of the best weekends, I think, in Gopher baseball history. It checked every box that John had. We had a full house, full of former players, family. I have a picture after the game of John and the family that's so proud. We had top competition, UCLA, Gonzaga. We beat UCLA twice that night. That never happens, but for John. And that was a great team. NCAA screwed us by sending us out to Corvallis to play the eventual national champions in Oregon State. And that somebody was talking about a strike zone that was small. That strike zone out of Corvallis was a little different when Max Meyer was out pitching than it was when their boy was. But it's all because of John. And his life is clearly an inspiration. And I think he'd like nothing better than for us to learn, take a lesson from how he lived his life and carry it forward and just try to be a little bit better tomorrow. So God bless the Andersons, Jan and Aaron in particular, and God bless John. Thank you for listening.
Good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be here for sure. And I was just sitting there as Mike was talking, and it kind of hit me. I can't believe we're really here talking about John like this. It's very hard. Jan and Aaron, you guys were awesome. It was beautiful. And thanks for sharing. And for everybody who showed up tonight, I just have a lot of gratefulness for that. Some of you guys that spoke, man, how do you do it without notes? I got a bunch of paper here. Let's see if we can get through it. I'm honored to be given the opportunity to share a little bit about my dear friend for 52 years. I'd like to start by publicly saying that I give thanks to Almighty God for bringing John into this world. He's an incredible gift to all of us. His legacy at the U is undeniable. The Big Ten tournament and conference championships, the multi-Big Ten Coaches of the Year, the Hall of Fames, the winningest coach in Big Ten history, and as Mike mentioned recently, named as the recipient of the Lefty Gomez Award, which acknowledges significant contributions to the game of baseball at the local, national, and international level. Very appropriate that John would receive that. During John's 43 years at the U, according to my math, there were 9 basketball coaches, 10 football coaches, 8 athletic directors, 1 baseball coach. Pretty amazing. That's right. And during his tenure, no scandals, incredibly high graduation rates, and a program that was run with extreme integrity. If a life well lived is measured by impacting others, John is an ultimate champion. He was truly a servant leader, preparing young men, literally hundreds of them, and as it has been so many times, preparing them for the next 50 years of their life. But you know, for me, I'd like to say it was 50 years and beyond. John's life exemplified a deeper spiritual side, one that exhibited love and joy and peace and goodness and kindness and gentleness and faithfulness and patience and self-control, except with the umpires. That preparedness of these young men included an everlasting connection to their Creator, not just their time here on earth. And I think a lot of them got that message. The last thing I want to mention about U baseball and John, and Rob touched on it, I don't think we would have our current program if it wasn't for the diligent work that John did in securing funds for building what I hope will be Anderson Stadium. I had an honorary chair position during that capital campaign, and I went with John to a few meetings, met with some potential donors, made a few calls. But John did all the deep, dirty work getting that thing done. He was tireless, and he was relentless. He knew what was at stake, and indeed, he made it happen. And like I said, at least in my opinion, if he hadn't got that facility built, I don't think there would be a Gopher baseball program today. Credit to John for that. My friendship with John, like Mike, started in 1974. Bushy hair and bright eyes and an undeniable passion for baseball. And unfortunately, the shoulder issues prevented him from competing at the level that he had hoped for. But the passion for the game never wavered. Head coach Dick Siebert, fondly known as the Chief, he noticed that, and he wanted to keep this Iron Rage kid in the program somehow. So he brought him on as student manager. And although he didn't play, John was one of us. In fact, John was the best of us. He did a little bit of everything in that role, took care of the equipment, took care of the fields, blisters from raking that dirt all the time. He was a cheerleader and an encourager, and at times he even had to be a counselor for the players, often serving as a mediator between the players and Coach Siebert, as well as John Anderson. In 1977, we had a really good team. We went to the College World Series, and it was near the end of the season where Chief informed the players that we had to pick an MVP. We were on a bus. We were returning from some Big Ten road trip. I think it was Iowa. And a bunch of us got to talking in the back of the bus, and John's name came up. As it was floated around, we kind of decided, hey, John should be our MVP. It didn't take long to reach a consensus. And I remember walking back up to the front of the bus to tell Chief of our decision. He kind of chuckled, but he didn't dismiss the idea. And across the aisle on the bus was George Thomas. And George unleashed one of those devilish smiles that he was famous for. I could tell he loved the idea of John being our MVP. So it was settled. 1977 Gopher baseball MVP was John Anderson. As you can imagine, when we informed John what we had decided, his reaction to the news was, "Please don't do this." They say a sign of true humility is someone being very uncomfortable with acknowledgement and recognition. They will always choose to deflect the attention in another direction. That was true for John in 1977, and that never changed, even with all the accolades that came his way through his entire incredible coaching career. Another thing I think about in our friendship when I reflect on meaningful times in my life, John was there. Not always physically, but he always made his presence felt. When I got drafted, he was there. When I made the big leagues, he was there. When I started a family, he was there. When I went to Cooperstown, he was there. When I got hired as a Twins manager, John was there. And when I got fired, John was there. In fact, I remember when I got fired, I was talking to John about it. He said, "Paul, look at it this way. More time for family and more time for golf." Not surprisingly, a very positive spin on a challenging time. I would imagine for a lot of you, if you think back on your life's journey, important times in your life, John was there. Another thing I've done over the past couple of weeks is read through a lot of the text chains that I had with John, and there was a lot of them. I became keenly aware of his kindness. So many inquiries about what was going on in my life and not about his life. How are your kids doing? How are those grandboys doing? How's that back? I know you had that surgery a while back. You feeling okay? I can't wait till we get back on the golf course together. And almost always grateful for our friendship. He liked to put that in his text. In addition to the kindness, I also, as I read through some of those texts, I saw his loyalty to family and to friends. His text adamantly expressing that Ty was to be the only person he would support to be the next Gopher baseball coach. He sticks to his guns. If you have the time to go back and maybe read some of your exchanges with John in your texts, not easy to do, might make you cry, but it also will make you smile. John lived a life full of love. Certainly of baseball, but it was also much more apparent in his relationship with people. He wasn't afraid to express it, and he gave of it freely. But it wasn't like John had this big one pie of love, and he had to slice it and dice it and distribute in that way. We each were granted our own pie, which displayed his ability to be present, to give his full attention to whoever he was talking with or dealing with. It was one of John's gifts. He made you feel like you were seen. But the one thing about the pie analogy, undeniably, Jan and Aaron had the biggest pies. Jan and Aaron, my deepest sympathies for the loss of your husband and your dad, and I just want to thank you for sharing him with us. You were both so sacrificial in allowing John to live the life that he did. He often spoke to me about his deep love for you. In closing, when a loved one passes, it kind of causes us to look at our own mortality. God has given us an opportunity to be in fellowship with him through his son, as we talked about at church today. And through that relationship, we have the promise of our place in eternity. And I'm so grateful in knowing that John has that faith. And I'm grateful in knowing that I will see my friend again. Thank you. I'm going to miss him. And now they've asked me to turn it over to a video. Thank you very much.
Day 14.
14.
Hi, John.
Coach Anderson, the legend.
Congratulations, Coach Anderson, on an amazing career.
I want to congratulate you on your great success throughout the years.
Thank you for the man that you are. Thank you for the time you spent with us. You have made Big Ten baseball what it is today.
So it's an honor to be able to be in this league, be able to spend a year with you, to coach against you this year.
You set the bar for Big Ten coaches. You've been a beacon for the community, a beacon for college baseball and for the Big Ten, and we can't thank you enough.
When you mention your name, the first word that comes to my mind was just consistency.
The commitment to the community, the commitment to your program, is really awe-inspiring.
I can't think of anybody who's given more to baseball in our state than John Anderson.
You are Minnesota baseball, and you always will be.
The ability for you to make connections with people is unsurpassed compared to any other coach I've ever seen.
I want to thank you for taking me under your wing 16 years ago as a first-year head coach in this league. You were very kind to me, and I can't thank you enough for that.
You created a family, a Gopher baseball family, that is just absolutely incredible. The network of people that are still connected because of the tireless work that you've done.
I attribute a lot of my success to being taught by a guy like you.
I can't help but smile every time I think of my Gopher baseball life. Hats off to you, 14.
Tip of the head to you for all you've done. I love you. Tip it off, buddy.
Very, very well-deserving tip of the hat to 14, the legend.
Take care, bud. We'll talk to you later.
All right, it's the 9th inning, and I've been given the task of speaking about John from a player's point of view. And I want to say to my teammates and every other Gopher baseball player here today, it's important to me that you know that I'm up here today not instead of you, but I'm up here today hopefully to represent you, because I know more now than ever over the last 2 weeks that my story is similar to yours and your story is similar to mine. And my story began during the 1989 Gophers spring trip, which, as fate would have it, was in Los Angeles. This allowed Rob to come out and see one of my high school games, to meet me in person, and later for me to meet John at a game at nearby UCLA. John and I had a nice long talk. God love him, but it was a 7-minute conversation that took about 47 minutes. But he spoke much differently than other coaches I had met with. He spoke more about academic and career opportunities than baseball opportunities. He talked more about character than wins and losses. And I heard what he was saying, but I was too immature to understand what he was saying. He offered me an official visit, and I accepted. Now, truth be told, I was mostly going to visit Minnesota as a favor to my father. And I'm sure, truth be told, John invited me partly or mostly as a favor to my father as well, who was a major league manager at the time and had become friends with John. And I thought, after I located Minnesota on the map for the first time since 4th grade, why not? When am I ever going to go back east to Minnesota? For Californians, back east is anything past Las Vegas. Yeah, we're special. So off I went in April 1989, and a funny thing happened on that trip. I loved it. Maybe it was my mother's Wisconsin roots, or maybe a hidden desire to get out of Los Angeles, but I felt strangely at home in this place called Minnesota. The guys on the team were so much more friendly and hospitable than my other visits, a reflection of John's character. I met the trainers, I met everyone in the equipment room. I met with an academic advisor who had already mapped out classes of interest for me, a reflection of John's character. And I had a nice lunch with the entire coaching staff at Annie's Parlor in Dinkytown. Again, different, and a reflection of John's character. And then they cut me loose for the night with a future teammate, Scott Backham. No reaction from my former teammates. That's a good thing. The next morning, I had breakfast with John at my hotel, where he made me an official offer to come to the University of Minnesota and play baseball for the Gophers. But before I returned to Los Angeles, I was going to watch the first game of a doubleheader against the University of Illinois at Siebert Field. The field was immaculate. The weather, a lovely, cloudy, windy, misty, 41 degrees, maybe. I didn't know you could play baseball in weather like that. And not only did they play, but when I made the mistake of asking why they were playing in this weather, a player, probably trying to scare me off, said, "This is nothing. We pray for days like this." So, armed with this late developing bit of information, I approached John at the end of the game to thank him and wish him a good life. But before I could, he looked me in the eye and said something I will never forget. "Ryan, we need a player like you." Nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. I had never felt like that before. And for a young man from a divorced family whose parents both remarried and had children, I had spent my life feeling the exact opposite. And I think John could see that in me from the very beginning. And I know that John said something like that to many of you in the arena today. And I know the Gophers would have done just fine without me. But John's words were all I could hear in my head on that long flight back to Los Angeles. And after a few days, I committed and became the first person in United States history to move from Southern California to Minnesota to play baseball. But I've always said it was the first mature decision I made in my life. I knew what I was getting, an opportunity to go away to college and play baseball. What John was getting was a cocky, insecure 18-year-old with a skateboard under his arm, an earring in his ear. How do you feel about that, Aaron? And a chip on his shoulder. I was a handful. Deservedly, I was called into the office for private conversations and called out in the dugout in front of my teammates. Either way, I always knew he cared about me. I wanted to be a good baseball player. John Anderson wanted me to be a good man. But I knew it wasn't only about me. One regrettable day in Columbus, I made another out in what had been a 1-for-19 weekend against Ohio State. Thinking only of myself, if you've seen the movie Christmas Story, I said, "Oh, fudge," on the way back to the dugout. Except I didn't say the "oh" part, and I yelled the fudge part into this big, empty stadium, and it echoed for like forever. John walked right up to me, grabbed me by my jersey, and told me, "Don't you ever embarrass your school, your teammates, your coaches, and me like that ever again. Do you understand?" I understood. And what I understood was that, yes, he cared about me, but he didn't just care about me. He cared about the integrity of his team. He cared about the integrity of the University of Minnesota, and no one player was bigger than that. And I don't think I ever yelled fudge at a baseball game again. When I had an alcohol-related incident that landed me in detox during my junior year, I dreaded having to walk into John's office and tell him. At this point, I knew that he would have expected me to tell him and not find out from someone else. And I wore an old shirt, so if he grabbed me like Ohio State, who cares? But instead, he closed the door, sat down next to me, and asked me if I was okay. He asked me if there was anything he could do to help me, not with any pending legal issues, that was my responsibility, but to figure out why I got into trouble in the first place. He hugged me, he told me he loved me and believed in me. And I believed him. I was going to change because I didn't want to let him down. And yet, years later, as a young broadcaster for the Twins and the Gophers, I got into a fist fight with one of his current players on campus. Again, alcohol related. At this point, John had asked me on several occasions to speak to his teams about life after baseball and how to take full advantage of my education and the many connections the U and Gopher baseball afforded. John used me as an example. And now I'm in his office again as a former player, apologizing for embarrassing him and myself. It was the most humiliating day of my life. And yet again, grace and mercy. Are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you? And you need to make things right with my player. I walked out of his office, determined to change. That was January of 1998. I never drank again. I've been asked by some of the most obvious and some of the most interesting people about playing for John Anderson. And this may sound strange, but I think you'll understand. I don't really remember how good of a coach he was. I wasn't paying close enough attention at the time. So I couldn't tell you if he was a good X's and O's guy. Rob was, Mike D was. I was too consumed with playing center field and getting on base, but I remember this. John Anderson was not just a head coach. John Anderson was a leader. He believed in his players and we knew it. He gave us space to fail both on and off the field, so long as we were respectful of the game, our education, the uniform we were wearing, our teammates, and our coaches. And we won year after year because of John Anderson's leadership. And we won because we wanted to win for him. And over time, we realized he cared more about the relationship than the record. He knew which one needed to come first. I love being a Golden Gopher. I love being a Golden Gopher because John Anderson believed in me. I've had some of the most life-changing experiences and made lifelong friends in Minnesota because John Anderson believed in me. I spent the first 18 years of my life in Southern California. I spent parts of 9 years in Minneapolis, and I've spent almost 28 years in Kansas City, and yet, after a trip here to play the Twins, people in Kansas City will say, even after all of this time, how was Minnesota? Did you get to see any family? I've never had family here. But I guess when I talk about Minnesota, it sounds like home. I've always said that I was born and raised in California, but I grew up in Minnesota because John Anderson believed in me. And I think it's true that when somebody close to us passes away, a part of us dies too. But I've come to realize, especially after so many text messages and phone calls the past 2 weeks, with so many of us sharing stories and laughing and crying as we grieve, that while a part of us has died with John's passing, many of us here tonight are living the life we have today because John Anderson believed in us. Ty recently shared with me that in times of discouragement, 14 would hum the rouser to lighten the mood and remind everyone in the room of the bigger picture. So in a moment, we're going to conclude by doing for ourselves what John would do for us by singing the rouser. So thank you, 14, for believing in us, taking chances on us, for coaching us, for loving us, because with all due respect, in the end, we needed you more than you ever needed us.
Save the buckshot, turn up the band.